Welcome to Book Talks with Colors of Influence. I am your host, Maylene Hampto. I am an avid reader and reviewer of books for my book blog, Colors of Influence, and I also review books for outlets and platforms such as City Books, Halo Halo Review, Book Sirens, Readsy, and the Nonfiction Authors Association. So Book Talks focuses on fiction and nonfiction works that highlight issues of diverse identities, equity and inclusion, social justice, Indigenous ways of being, and decolonial approaches to the struggle for liberation. I talk with authors whose works contribute to a nuanced understanding of various cross-cultural contexts of our shared humanity and common dreams. The works featured in this web series reveal essential truths about the author's unique perspectives. And in this episode, I am so honored to host my dear kapwa in community, Justine Villanueva, author of the picture book Mungan and Lola. Justine traces her ancestral roots to Bukidnon, Philippines. She was raised in Balay, Bukidnon until she immigrated to the United States when she was a teenager. She now resides in the unceded Wintun Patwin homeland in Davis, California. So in 2016, Justine created Sawaga River Press, which publishes award-winning children's books that feature Filipinx, Filipino, Filipina children in the diaspora. And Mungan and Lola is the latest release from Sawaga River Press. The press strives to help those who are yearning to reconnect with their cultural and historical roots, as well as to learn to belong in their present lands. The first encyclopedia of Filipinx American Studies features Sawaga River Press as a trailblazing children's book press that publishes books by, about, and for the Phil-Am community. In addition, the Independent Book Publishers Association recognized Sawaga River Press for demonstrating a commitment to publishing excellence while telling stories of their communities. According to Justine, and I quote, "Publishing books is my form of prayer for our collective healing and return to ourselves, to the collective kapwa, which includes all of us, human and more than human kin." In addition, I wrote a review of the children's picture book Mungan and Lola for Halo Halo Review, and here's a quick excerpt. Mungan is a girl named after the first babaylan of Bukidnon. She loves to tell stories to her Lola, her grandmother, and one day she notices her grandmother seeming sad, a departure from her gleeful self. Mungan is determined to find out what is wrong, and only after Mungan asked and listened deeply to Lola's grief and longing did she understand the depth of the elder's sorrow and what could bring her back from Minghoy or her low spirits. So Justine delivers a touching and heartwarming story that centers on the gifts of intergenerational connections, ancestral Filipino knowledge, and traditional Indigenous practices from her native Bukidnon. Mungan and Lola is set in an unnamed place in the diaspora where the girl and Lola share stories amid the oak trees and poppies. The story reveals that Mungan's family remains closely tied to knowledge and practices from the homeland. Welcome, Justine. It is such an honor to have you on Book Talks.
Thank you, Maylene.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if we can start with the creation story for Mungan and Lola, starting with talking about the Sawaga River Press. Can you give a quick summary of the offerings of the press, and why is it important for Indigenous Filipino stories to be shared in the diaspora?
Thank you. And first of all, I just want to say that is such a huge and important question about indigeneity and Indigenous stories and the diaspora. I'm almost afraid to answer it. But I will fumble along because there's beauty in fumbling for words. So, but let me start by just talking a little bit about Sawaga River Press and its creation. And you've touched on so many things, so I don't want to repeat a lot of the stuff. But I want to say that the Sawaga River Press is named after the river of my ancestors in Malaybalay, Bukidnon, as you mentioned, where I was raised until I immigrated to the United States. It's been decades since I left, and I still, in my heart, long for this river. But I have learned over the years that though I cannot be there and I cannot be with my ancestors in the homeland, I can still sing this river to my present and my now by remembering and telling and now publishing stories that connect me to the river and to my homeland, even though I am now here in the Winton Patwin homeland in Davis. I think of what we do in the press as planting these seeds because these seeds carry the culture, carry the stories of my homeland. And it is here in the diaspora that I'm planting these seeds. And so that's kind of just the backdrop, sort of the bigger picture of what we're trying to do with the press. All our books are multilingual. They are in Bisaya Cebuano, which is one of the languages, one of the settler languages spoken in Bukidnon. We also use Binukid, which is the indigenous language of Bukidnon. We also use Tagalog, one of our languages, and of course, English. And we touch on topics that are indigenous to the Filipino spirit, like kapwa. You and I talked spirit of kinship between our human and non-human relatives, and our relationships with our elders, our ancestors, and the land, the homeland, and where we are now. And we also tell stories that draw their inspiration from the Bukidnon stories, like the indigenous myths and epics, like the Ulaging, which tell the story of the warrior Agyu, that is in our Jack and Agyu book, and the Babaylan Mungan, which is now the Mungan and Lola book. It is very important for us to tell these stories here in the diaspora because, like I said, well, it's important, let me just backtrack. It is important for us, for the adults, but especially the kids that are born in a diaspora because they really are separate, many layers from the homeland and from the ancestors, so to speak. And they don't remember or they don't know this unless we share their stories. And of course, as the famous Dr. Jose Rizal says, ang hindi marunong lumingon sa kanyang pinanggalingan, hindi makakarating sa kanyang paroroonan. So we have to know where we come from to know or to get to where we want to go. So like I said, these stories are the seeds of our Filipino culture, and they teach us about our ancestors' indigenous ways of being. But how are they helpful when we are no longer in the homeland, when we are here, settlers and visitors in somebody else's homeland, right? So that's the question. And I've learned that to be indigenous to a place means to belong to the land. And indigeneity is defined by our belonging and relationship to the land. It doesn't mean homeland, it just means the land where you are. So these indigenous Filipino stories, even though they're based in our homeland, then still help us and guide us in our journeys to belong to the land where we are now. So Kapwa, for example, it is a very distinctly indigenous Filipino worldview, but it still very much applies to us Filipinos living in the diaspora and to not just Filipinos, obviously. So there are these lessons in our indigenous Filipino stories that still applies to where we are now because they are land-based. And so this is our big push, is to just tell stories from which we can draw lessons from our ancestors that we can then apply to where we are, wherever it is in the diaspora.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much, Justine. And, from the work that we've done together in the Center for Babaylan Studies, I have really come to appreciate the love and care that you have put into this press, and everything you do really has been really representative of your, sort of your kapwa consciousness and how you interact with others in the diaspora, and also making sure that these stories are kept alive, right? And in the surface of consciousness of our, as you mentioned, not just the children, but also the adults that are here with us. And so I was wondering, what was the impetus for writing the book Mungan and Lola? I've detected that grief is such a centerpiece of the story, and yeah, if you could just share a little bit more about that.
Sure. Again, this is a big, big question, and bear with the answer here because it's a little circuitous. It's not as linear as we would like to be for it to be, because it does talk about the creative process, and that is slippery and hard to articulate sometimes. But you provided a story, the quick summary of the story, so I don't have to go through that. But yes, grief is the centerpiece of this story. I wanted to have a way to talk about the unprocessed grief that I was seeing many in our Philippine American community, especially the elderly, seem to be grappling with. And again, it is due to their separation from their homeland, separation from their indigenous ways of being, separation from themselves, from their language. And what I have learned through our work with CFBS is that grief really is our longing for wholeness. We want to be whole. We want to not be separated. But we've forgotten how to be whole. And this is why we need our healers, our babaylan, because they can help us reconnect to what we may have lost or are no longer remembering. And I wanted to talk about all these, but they're so big, and I didn't know how to tackle these themes with a children's book. And then one day I was watching my niece, my 10-year-old niece then. She was brushing my mom's hair, her Lola's hair. And at that point, my mom had already lost her memory. My mom had dementia. She's already passed last year. But at that time, my mom had forgotten a lot and she couldn't speak. But my niece was brushing her hair and she was singing and telling my mom stories. I don't know if she understood, my mom understood. But even though my mom had already lost her words at that point, she started to also hum and talk with my niece. And I saw at that moment that my niece was taking care of her Lola by brushing her hair and singing, and she was a healer of sorts. And that was when I started thinking, first of all, of memory loss, individual memory loss, and collective memory loss, but there's the healing somewhere in that image, right? And my mom always used to tell me, because I always lose things, that Justine, ang kalimot walay gahom, which essentially in Bisaya means amnesia has no power. So, if you forget things, you have no power. So then I started thinking, this is right. If we forget about our relationships to ourselves, our relationship to the land and with everybody, we have no power, and we've lost so much of ourselves. And so how do we remember? How do we remember? That was a big thing. How do we heal from these grief? And that was the answer for me, was the embodied rituals of care that anybody can do, even little kids. Kids are good at it because they don't question these things. And that gave me an insight into talking about grief, which sounds like a very adult theme, in a way that even the youngest of us can understand. And so, yeah, then it became the story of a little ancestor in training who's named after the Babaylan Mungan, who takes care of her Lola through brushing her hair and cooking food and doing hilot and all that, and helps Lola feel feel better, but helps Lola gain back her energy and her life, so to speak. So it's really grief, but also on the flip side of grief, right? It's the joy of the relationships that we have also.
Yeah. And you emphasize the importance of healing, right? Like coming on the other side of grief. And it was so rich what you mentioned about the different layers of individual grief and also collective grief, and how
Mm-hmm.
it's not just to our kind of losing our memory of what it's like to be back home, and all of those healing modalities and rituals, so to speak. Even cooking is a ritual, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
seemingly simple, what you had described, brushing of an elder's hair and
Mm-hmm.
singing is all part of the healing process. And as you mentioned, like children are really good about about because they don't question, they do, and they really embody these healing
Mm-hmm.
practices. Yeah. And I love your background, Justine, with having the characters from previous books. And so at this time, I was wondering if you can do a quick show and tell for us, and sharing some excerpts and also artwork that are featured in the book. I
Sure.
know that you've also involved several collaborators in creating the book. So if you could talk also a little bit about, why each partnership is important.
Sure, sure. Let me find my, give me a second. There's always a moment here of,
Yeah, yeah,
am I
no.
going to do this right? Or am I going to reveal some secret thing that I shouldn't have put?
Always. It's there's
Okay.
sharing. There you go. I see.
Okay. Whew, good. Okay, so we have here, first of all, I want to mention that our illustrator Ray Sunga is the best to work with. He was very thorough in his research and just gave his heart also to the project. So much appreciation for the work that he's done here. So here you're seeing the narrator. Like I mentioned, the Mungan and Lola is based on the epic, let me just quickly mention this because I feel this is very important. I don't want to not share this. So Mungan, the character Mungan is named after the Babaylan of Bukidnon. And the story of Mungan can be found in the Ulaging, which is the epic, which tells the story of the adventures of the warrior Agyu who helps the Bukidnon people flee from the invaders of their homeland and then find a new homeland. And Mungan is Agyu's sister-in-law, and her story is that she was sick, she had leprosy, and when they flee the invaders, she had to be left behind. And while she was left behind, the gods had mercy on her and gave her the mama, the betel nut, for her to heal herself. And so she did that. She heals, and then when the tribespeople came back to visit her later, she shared with them the mama, and then the lessons of how to share, and all of that. So Mungan is all about healing. And so here you can, and so it's an oral history. And so one of the reasons why we've chosen to have a narrator that opens and closes the story, is because it's a nod to the oral storytelling tradition from which we drew this book, which is not oral, but that's the source of the story. So here you can see this is the narrator inviting the reader to come and sit, and it approximates sitting by the fireside to listen to a story. And so here, this is the opening spread of the book, and it has the butterfly, which is one of our main themes of the story representing the ancestors and migration. But in the background, you can see names of our lolas and the places where they were born, where they come from, so both living and elder, uh, and the places where they migrated to and have called home. And so, for example, here, gosh, I can barely see it because my eyes are so bad. But anyway, I hope you can see it. I think it says Lola Rosing,
Mm-hmm.
and then Lanao del Sur, maybe, and Mama Puring, Camposes, Cebu. So these are names of our lolas, and we've solicited them. We've asked our community members to send these names to us if they wanted the lolas to be honored and included in the book. And I was very surprised that we had so many of these names sent to us. So you asked about collaborating with the community, and this is one way that we did. And also another way, no, sorry, a way where we've included the community in the bookmaking process so that it's also their book, because now their Lola is there and it talks about ancestry, our ancestors. So that's that. This is my favorite page. When I read the names of the Lolas, I'm always amazed at how upstanding the names are, like purificación, you know. Anyway, I think your Lola is here somewhere, Lolas.
My
So
Lolas are there. Yes. Thank you so much, Justine, for the opportunity to honor them for sure.
no, it was really my pleasure to include the Lola's names. And okay, so that's one way we have collaborated with the community. And I wanted to share this, even though it's not very artsy, because this highlights the collaborators and supporters we've worked with. And this is clearly not the complete list. But as you can see, well, we have our artists, but we also have our collaborators. There's the Amado Kaya Foundation, who've helped us with the processing of the book. And then the biggest one really is the Bukidnon State University, who helped us with the translations from English to Binukid and Bisaya and Tagalog, because I want to make sure that my eyes, not just mine, are looking at them. And they also vet all the cultural references in the book. And I think you were in that Zoom meet and greet where I had the collaborators come in, and I was surprised, Mylene, when I think about 15 of them showed up, and I didn't even know, because I was always talking to a couple, Professor Loretta Dinlayan and Professor Risa Ramos Gonzad. They were the two people that I always spoke with. I didn't really realize that there were also teams that were just they're working with. And so much appreciation for all the work and support that they have given to the press and to me. So that's them. And then, of course, there's Center for Babaylan Studies, all the lessons that I have learned from being now part of the core membership. But even before I became a member of CFBS, I've learned so much in my decolonization journey from the offerings of the center. And then here are supporters. First of all, the biggest one that I want to point out is that we are crowdfunded, and we had about 200 crowdfunders to raise about $12,000 for this book. And I couldn't write all of them, but I have given our thanks to them on our website, and personal thanks as well. And then all these other people who have in many other ways supported us. So this really, did I do it? No, I didn't. So another thing that's needing to be mentioned for this is that on top of the actual story, we also have extra resources for the book. So I didn't put it here. I should have done it. But we also have lesson plans and mental health check-ins, summary of the Philippine American history, a little bit about the rituals of care that we've highlighted. So there's a lot more resources written by other people in this book. So when I say it's written by me or written by so and so, it's really not the whole picture. There's so many of us in the community who have given our time and talents and efforts to this book. And so I feel confident when I say that this is not just a book by the press, but it is also, well, it is the book by the press with a community. So, okay, so this I wanted to show because it highlights how we have worked with the languages. So part of the challenge here is that we were working with 3-4 different languages. So how do we do that? And it's how do we put on the page how people who speak multi-languages speak, right? Because it's an oral thing. You hear it. But here, if you don't speak Bisaya or if you don't know Binukid, you will look at it and it's just one big thing of words that you don't understand. So that's why we had a challenge of using different types and fonts. And then we used not a lot, but a few footnotes. And so I think we did a good job. I think shout out to our graphic designer here, Adrian Hyder, who did an amazing job of working with the types and the fonts and basically really the design, because as you can see, it's in Hainaku, which, oh, I also have to say thank you to Eileen Tabios for the Hainaku, which is the form, the form that we've used here. And Eileen is the inventor of the Hainaku. So that's another collaboration there that I forgot to mention in the prayer page, but here it is now. And so anyway, I'm showing this for the purposes of highlighting the different languages in the book and how we've worked with it. And this is just a bonus jamming.
Jamming. It's so beautiful.
Yes. Jamming with the taklob sa kaldero, which is the pot lids. Okay, I will end right there.
Yeah, this is such a beautiful book, Justine. I have 2 copies myself.
Yay!
Yeah, and there's just so much kind of depth and richness to how you and the illustrator and the graphic designer have collaborated to really highlight sort of the cultural aspects, and as you mentioned, working with 3 different languages in one book, right, and making sure that the story hangs well. I've observed some of our kapwa. I mean, there were grown-ups, but like really reading to each other and learning about the
Ah,
words, right? And all that. And it was just really heartwarming to see how different people have been engaged, have been involved in creating this book. I remember when you sent out the call for Lola names and places where they were born. I thought that was a really innovative, way to make sure that everyone is included and everyone sees themselves and sees their Lolas and be able to honor their family, their lineage in this book of healing and also embracing grief, right? Because how
yeah.
can we heal without acknowledging that there is grief and forgetting? So appreciate that. And my next question is about sort of your own journey, right? So I know you have been on this kind of long process of decolonization. You've been one of the folks that we look up to in terms of writing these stories, helping us to remember these stories from the homeland. But in the process of writing Mungan and Lola, what did you discover about your own journey of decolonization, re-indigenization?
So once again, this is a very powerful and humbling question, Mylene. when I think about my journey, my decolonization journey, it seems to have led me to this work that I do now with publishing and creating stories about our indigeneity. And the one lesson, and there are many lessons, by the way, but the one lesson that I have learned, and I'm still learning it, is that this work that I'm doing is not really just my work. I mean, we talked about the collaborations, so clearly it's not just me doing the actual work, but also the stories themselves that we are telling. They're not my stories. They're not individual stories. They're the stories of the world. And they're being told through me and the structures that I have helped put in place and in collaboration with the other people who are also receptive to the world's stories. It's a very collaborative thing. And so what this tells me is that the community really is part of the work. We all have a role in this. And if I step up as the publisher and I commit my time to devote to this calling, which is what I've considered now is my calling, for me to succeed in this very community work, the community also needs to step up and support from their own abundance. So it's taken me a while to kind of realize that, because there's this mentality of like, this is my press, this is my, this is my thing, I'm going to go at it. But really, to be sustainable, the community really needs to publish with me. And that is also kapwa in practice, right? So the book is a manifestation of this kapwa spirit. And the book is medicine for us, but the process also is the medicine for us. So beyond the product, which is the book, the process involved in making this book is also medicine. And so this is such a big and an important endeavor. And the biggest lesson that I'm getting, that I have learned, is that I can't do it on my own. I cannot do it on my own. I shouldn't be doing this on my own. And so the challenge for me is, how do I bring the community with me? Not just for one book, which they did, which the community did for Mungan, but for the time that I spend doing this. And I foresee myself doing this kind of work for the rest of my life, right? My heart is in here. This is the work that I am choosing to do. The challenge for me is, how do I get the community to come with me through the journey? Maybe not all the time, but at the very least, like certain points of the journey. And I don't have the answer. So I just have the realization that this is not my thing. This is a community thing. And this is a kapwa thing here, Maylene. And there's a relief to knowing that, because if I fail, I'm gonna use my air quotes here. If I fail, it's not because I individually failed. It is because the support is not there from the community, or there are certain things that are not happening. It's not just me. And on the flip side, if we succeed, if this is a good, if the publishing is going well, it is not just because I am doing well. It is because the community is supporting and giving in their abundance. And so having that mentality for me is really eye-opening. I have yet to figure out how to, really lean into the community. But at the very least, I'm realizing that, and that's a powerful realization.
Absolutely. And you were always so modest, Justine, about sort of this is not definitely a success. And I just from my exposure to the community that has really embraced this book, right? They are so appreciative that this book exists and that you continue to lead us into getting involved in Sawaga River Press. I know there's a crowdfunding campaign that's going on now, and all of the people that are contributing to that and really bought into your vision, of making sure that these stories continue to advance and be embraced by the next generation, right? So totally appreciate that. And my last question, my second to the last question, is I know that in the social media let's see, accounts that you have kind of shown how Mungan and Lola has really been going the rounds in the libraries, the schools, and it's really been kind of embraced and accepted and by folks from different cultures, even outside of the Filipino community. And so I was just wondering, when presenting Mungan and Lola to various audiences, what feedback have you received that has been most memorable?
I love this. I love this question. Okay, so the book is ostensibly a picture book. It's marketed that way. But I think it meets the reader, whether they're 5 years old or a teenager or a young adult or a Lola, wherever they are in their life journey and in their decolonization journey, if that's something that they're engaged in. And so I love it when young kids tell me they love their Lola too, and they do hilots for their Lola. That's always endearing. And I love it when older people tell me that they've also started talking to their apos and telling them their immigration story. So, but my most memorable unsolicited email came from someone who I don't know. She said she randomly bought the book when she was at a fair, and she emailed me to tell me that I'm going to read it here. She soaked up every word and it she said, I soaked up every word. It grounded me and transported me into another world. It spread my awareness of the Filipino diaspora and helped me think about all of the life in the land and my ancestors. Your book has not come at a better time as I reawaken my spirituality and return to my roots. It is the most beautiful book I've ever read. And I was like, oh, you get the story. So anyway, that is my most memorable sharing of love for the book. And, we mentioned this in the very beginning. We started talking about my work as a publisher, as planting these seeds of belonging. And I know I will not be around for when these seeds turn into a mighty oak or a mighty tree that then bear more seeds to grow into mighty trees and so on. But I take joy and comfort in knowing that I have done my part, my small part, but significant in the grand scheme of creation. So yeah, there's that.